Welcome to the Health Channel, all health, all the time. I'm Katty Buccio, coming to you from the Baptist Health South Florida studios. Because autism is so prevalent, it's likely that you know someone affected by autism. Rates are up to 1 in 59 children, and according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, an autism diagnosis means different challenges for different people. Today, we have a very special show talking to parents about autism and the power of support available for families. And joining us today is Carol Del Sol, Manager of Care Coordination at West Kendall Baptist Hospital. We also have Dr. Mavara Mirza-Agrawal, Medical Director of the FIU Embrace Program and an Associate Professor at the Herbert Wortham College of Medicine at Florida International University, an academic affiliate of Baptist Health South Florida. And she also works closely with Autism Speaks. Dr. Agrawal, first of all, both of you, thank you for being here. Carol, as well, you for sharing your personal story. Doctor, if I can begin with you, how did you get involved in this the organization?
Sure. So my original, as you know, I'm with the Florida International University with the College of Medicine, and my original training is actually in pediatrics as well as internal medicine. And so my interest is in following children with chronic diseases into adulthood. Right. And that is sort of how I train. But my passion really for autism stems from my own daughter, who was diagnosed with autism years ago. Okay. And that's where I shifted, right, from being the physician that knew that we were doing just about everything we possibly could, right? I was an academic physician at a major medical center with access to services, to knowledge, to specialists, all of that. And I knew we were doing the best we could for her. But as a parent, I always had the hope that I could do more. Right. And that's what pushed me into the advocacy piece and searching and really learning all I could about autism.
So I want to thank you as well for sharing your personal story. So when it comes to Autism Speaks, what is it about the organization? What was it about their message or what they do for the community that got you inspired?
So Autism Speaks really reaches out to people at all levels and stages. I think that is the wonder of Autism Speaks. Right. As a parent, you're not always ready for information, right? And when you first start out, you're almost afraid to open that page and look at what
it's scary. Scary.
But Autism Speaks puts it into bite-sized pieces, into pieces that you can work with at the stage and phase that you are physically, mentally, and financially to be able to access the services that you need. That's what's really interesting about and unique about Autism Speaks.
Absolutely. And Carol, tell us a little bit about your background as well and your personal story.
Okay, so I work in case management. I'm the manager of the case management department at West Kendall Baptist Hospital. And it's interesting because as a case manager, I really had no idea that I would have to use my skills as a case manager to advocate for my son. Wow. So I have a 14-year-old son. He was diagnosed at 21 months.
What's his name?
Nicholas.
Nicholas.
So my son's name is Nicholas.
There he is.
That is one of the autism walks.
Okay.
That's my father and my mother and my niece. One of the many walks that we've attended.
Of course.
There he is when he was little.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, so before I get distracted with children pictures. So I'm sorry, go ahead. So at 21 months,
he was diagnosed, which was kind of unheard of at the time. You know, I started to notice changes in his developmental milestones. He had acquired a certain number of words in his repertoire. He started to lose speech, not respond to his name. At first I thought, you know, maybe there's something going on with his hearing, and not playing appropriately with toys, things of that nature.
Okay.
So I did seek, you know, help. I went to the pediatrician and asked, you know, I think something's wrong. And of course, you know, he was 18, 19 months at the time. They didn't have the knowledge that they have today. So I was told, no, there's nothing to worry about. You know, boys talk later than girls. If you see something that doesn't seem right in a month, you know, go ahead and come back in a month. So a month later, I was back. And of course, you know, at that point, I pushed, so I got a speech and language evaluation. And that was really the turning point, because my husband at the time was hearing, you know, well, the pediatrician said nothing's wrong. So stop looking for something,
right?
You know, and that's because some parents don't. I mean, you don't want to hear it, you don't see it, you don't want to hear it. But as a parent,
and you trust the doctor, so you want to believe the doctor.
And you know, so anyway, I ended up going to obtain a speech and language evaluation, and the speech therapist validated my concerns. So I went back and asked for a referral to go see a neurologist, and I ended up at that time at the Dan Marino Center. Where I had seen a commercial, because where do you go? I didn't know where to go.
Right.
No idea where to go. And sure enough, he was diagnosed at 21 months, and we've been on our journey ever since.
Wow. And if you can share your story as well, doctor, how did you know as well?
So for us, it started with seizures, and that was sort of the real wake-up call. And so there are up to about 30% of children with autism may also have seizures, 20 to 30%.
Right.
And so that really was the big sign. But we knew, I think as a parent, you know, right? You have a gut feeling, you don't want to believe it, but you have a gut feeling that something is wrong. And that's why it's so important for us as parents to step up, right? When we are in the parent role, to step up and speak to clinicians and to voice your concerns over and over again. Right?
How was that for you, doctor? Because as you had both spectrums, you are a medical professional and you're a parent. So was it a lot easier, or was it still challenging?
I think that was the problem, is I thought I knew how to take care of autism, right? But I didn't know what it was like to live with autism.
Right.
That was the biggest challenge. So once you have that in your home, you're like, there's got to be more we can do for these guys, right? There's just got to be more out there. And so that's where I really started searching for other treatments, for other opinions, for what other therapies back 10, 12 years ago. Services were not.
Resources.
Exactly. And so we went on a journey, and we learned, and I every moment counted, right? So it was like almost a race along against the clock. You learned as much as you could about autism. I sat there and I would read about occupational therapy, physical therapy. I went to grad school for behavioral therapy.
Wow.
Everything I could learn on how to help her improve is what I did. Right. And then now what I do is I turn around and I try and bring that to the community, to physicians, to clinicians.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't me alone doing this. There was always a parent at my side, right? And that's what this show is about.
Right, the support, that you're not alone, because it's scary, whether you have the resources or you don't.
It is extremely important that you support one another. It is a challenge. When you receive a diagnosis, you go through different stages, and we had talked about this briefly yesterday. If you're familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grieving, as a parent, you have these expectations for your child. You bring a child into the world and you imagine what their life is going to be, and it's almost like grieving the death of a child, which is, those are strong words to say, but you go through the acceptance, the bargaining, the grieving, you go through all of that, the anger, the denial, and then compile that with some guilt because you still have a child.
Because you think it's your fault in some way when it isn't.
Exactly.
Right.
So seeking support from family members, seeking support from the community, seeking support from mental health professionals. Right. I mean, anything that you need to do. I have a neurotypical daughter, so I was watching this and it was kind of moving to me. My older daughter she became like a little mom.
Right.
So then, you're also dealing with as a parent, sort of the guilt of, this is going to be hers in the future when I'm gone.
And it'll always be.
And it will always be hers.
Absolutely.
So
now you're watching the Health Channel, all health, all the time on South Florida PBS. If you have a question, please call in using the toll-free number 855-796-4475. So what can an autism diagnosis mean? Let's start with a child, for a child, and what does it mean for a parent, and then as a whole, for the family? Because it affects everyone.
So autism is a diagnosis, it's a neurologic condition, right? And there are specific criteria for diagnosing it. So social deficits in social communication, certain repetitive behaviors. You have to make sure that there aren't other conditions that are mimicking it, and it's always diagnosed before a certain age and so forth. And so I don't want to without getting into too much of the detail of it. And what it means for the child is really, what they require is at least 20 hours. What the American Academy of Pediatrics supports is at least 20 hours of one-on-one intensive therapy, right? So behavioral therapy, and let's talk a little bit about that, because there isn't a pill that cures autism.
Right.
And it's really important because even now families are uncertain when the diagnosis first made. One of the toughest decisions to make is, what do I do for my child? There are hundreds of treatments out there. They're all looking for mind share, for money, for time, all of those pieces. And families have to make very significant decisions that impact their lives long term. The mainstay of treatment is behavioral therapy, physical, speech, and occupational therapy. Right. So let's solidify that, right? Anything above that.
And now that child is going through these therapies and these treatments for the rest of their life, mostly.
Right.
Okay.
And it usually means that someone in that family is taking probably taking going from a full-time position to possibly a part-time position, right? This is what the national statistics show. We know that in research, at least 40, 50, 60% of families who have a person with special needs at home go from full-time to part-time employment in order to support that individual, right? And they're driving them to the therapies, they're taking care of them, and then all the same while, the sibling is there as well, right?
Yes.
And so it's a big challenge on the whole family.
Wow.
And then financially.
And financially. For those that thankfully will have resources, they're able to do these therapies, but let's say those families who may not have the financial means to give their child everything they want to give them.
Sure.
Exactly.
So the estimated cost of early intervention, according to the CDC, is anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 a year. That's the early intervention piece, right? It's not talking about the extra medical care that they may need because they have some other medical condition along with it, perhaps seizures, perhaps attention deficit disorder, right? All of those other conditions that sometimes come up with autism. So just the the early intervention alone is quite expensive, and that's why the insurance piece is so impactful.
We have a caller. We have Jennifer from Colorado. Jennifer, are you with us?
I'm with you, Kathy.
Hi. Do you have a question?
I do. There's been a lot of talk in the media about using CBD oil for children with autism, and I just wanted to, get their take on how they feel about it and if there are benefits.
That's a good question. Go ahead.
Sure, that's a great question. And so right now the indication, CBD oil is not really indicated for autism in general. What it is being used, and really the pharmacological version of CBD oil is really Epidiolex, right? And that is really FDA approved for seizures and only in individuals who have already tried other treatment modalities, meaning have failed treatment, traditional treatment for seizures with regular medication. If that doesn't work, then neurologists consider Epidiolex. But in general, it is not indicated for autism.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, as we mentioned, autism takes many forms. I want to remind our viewers that you can call in if you have a question. The number 855-796-4475. We'd love to hear from you. Now, we have a caller who wishes to remain anonymous, and they have a question for the doctor. Hi, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi, how are you? If you have a question, please go ahead.
I'm just wondering, how do you deal with a situation where you have two children and both are autistic?
Wow. That's a good question.
That's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up.
Is that a common situation or very unusual?
So it's not very unusual. There are, families who have certain genetic conditions that make them more likely to have autism, and so that's really what we need to look for. If that hasn't been done, we need to look at genetic testing in that family and think about what conditions may have predisposed this person to have autism, and figure out how also, if there are other children in that household, how that might affect their future children as well. So looking at it not just in terms of the two that are affected, but if they have a third or a fourth sibling, let's say, what are their probability of having someone with a genetic syndrome that can also lead to autism.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for calling in. I appreciate it. Now, I want to talk, I know that you're going to be leaving us after this segment, Doctor, but I want to talk about Autism Awareness Month. Let's talk about advocacy and also what's available out there in terms of resources and early diagnosing as well.
Sure. So early diagnosis is really important. We know that signs and symptoms of autism often show up as early as 6 months in children, right? At 6 months, parents are saying, oh, this child isn't quite looking at me, or at 9 months old, when I'm pointing to something, they're not really looking that way. Those are early signs, very subtle, but very early on, that can be seen in infants and toddlers with autism. Reliably, we can diagnose it at about 2 years old, where we have to, as physicians, we have to balance overdiagnoses versus underdiagnoses, right? And so we can reliably diagnose it at 2 years old with testing. And oftentimes a pediatrician can do that for you. And regardless, knowing that most kids are not diagnosed until they're 4 or even 5 years old,
late.
right? Which means that there's a delay to treatment. And early intervention, meaning early applied behavior analysis, speech, occupational, physical therapy, are what make the difference, that make change trajectories in this population. That's key. And so if you're not in a place where you're ready to seek services, I urge you to talk with someone, to come forward and ask for help, because behavior therapy is not as scary as it looks. And I think Autism Speaks has some great videos on it, so I would use Autism Speaks as a great resource. I think it's very important. The other piece of advocacy that I'd like to talk about really is about understanding and acceptance for this population. You know, we've come a long way since in the last 10 years in terms of autism awareness and just realizing that autism exists. Now I think it's time for us to step into the next phase, which is understanding and acceptance.
Right.
And when I say that is because oftentimes when we see someone with autism acting out, what we call having a behavior, let's say, right? And we'll often use that in clinics.
Right, the child's having a tantrum, he's misbehaving,
exactly,
he or she,
exactly.
you know.
What I want to say is that it's really important for us to realize that we all, as humans, are constantly communicating. We're constantly using our hands, our eyes, our visual, right? We're always communicating, and these individuals, when they behave, they cannot communicate.
Think
right?
about that frustration for a child not being able to communicate or express what they want.
Exactly. So, when I see my patients in my waiting room, and I think I mentioned I take care of adults with autism in a multidisciplinary clinic at FIU at the College of Medicine. Oftentimes, you'll see them jumping around, acting, saying loud things, and your general sort of visceral response is, why is this person doing that? Right? And they're doing it because they're communicating. They're communicating that they're happy to be there, that they're scared to be there, that they're nervous about what's happening. That's what they're communicating. And if we as a society can sort of realize that this person isn't trying to do anything, be aggressive, any of that, it's simply that they're nervous and they're trying to communicate what they feel to you. The last piece I want to talk really about is how do we change trajectories for families, right? We as a society have certain very big decisions to make. Every year, 50,000 children with autism become adults, meaning that they transition into adulthood.
And now we want these to be functional adults as well, where they can have some quality of life and be a part of that life.
Absolutely, and they can be contributing members to our society, right? And we have some major decisions to make about where we are going to how we're going to use our funding to support. Are we going to do it at the beginning in early intervention programs? And I think it's really important to think about having more funding for those early intervention programs, because the other choice is to support it at the back end, right? This is my own personal opinion. Either we can do it when these individuals become more dependent on us. The other piece I want to emphasize, and it's something that I've learned over the years, both as a clinician watching families as they grow, and as well as a parent. Right? And that's going back to my point about how do we create a continuum of care in the education system, because we know that education, applied behavior analysis, behavioral therapy, all these therapies that I keep talking about are what change trajectories. And the way to do that is, what I'm seeing right now are families send their children to school. They're there for, let's say, 6 hours. Then they come home, they go pick up that child and they take them to the various therapies, and that's a whole another section of their lives. What I, as a clinician, as a researcher, as a physician in this space, would love to see is how to combine those, right? Other states are doing this. They are integrating that early education, those therapies into the school education. And that's really the optimal setting to have that be done in. So those are the two pieces.
Thank you, Doctor. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, because that information was invaluable. You're watching the Health Channel, All Health, all the time on South Florida PBS. If you have a question, please call in using the toll-free number, 855-796-44. We've been talking about autism and what a diagnosis can mean for a family. And I understand that you have 2 children that are both diagnosed with autism?
Yes. Right, correct.
Okay, so how was it for you when you found out that your children were diagnosed?
Well, we've been married for 24 years. And we're nurses by profession. That does not even, being a nurse does not even prepare you. You're not prepared for, the news. You get in that doctor's office, in a neurologist's office, getting ready, but you come out with more questions than answers. It's distressing, it is confusing, it is overwhelming.
Right.
So that's how we came out, after the diagnosis.
I can't even begin to imagine, but I want to get a feel for your kids. What are their names? How old are they? And how old were they when they were diagnosed as well?
Lance was diagnosed at age 2.
Okay.
He's our oldest boy. And our daughter, Lauren, was diagnosed at 4.5.
4.5.
However, Lauren was part of the Seed Smile study at So at 6 months, she was already monitored for
Okay.
early signs and symptoms.
Yes.
But Lauren went through a more typical course, and then she got stuck with solitary play. And then that's when we did more intensive evaluation, and then she got finally diagnosed at 4.5.
And for Lance,
Lance, age 2.
age 2, but was his one
He
of
was
those?
very severe. She was in those where you have severe symptoms, injurious behavior, tantrums. He lost his speech, peculiar play.
These are some of the signs of autism. Now, did you start noticing these? Did you start noticing the certain symptoms in the kids? I mean, as you said, she was there for 6 months, started getting monitored. But did you
Yes.
notice some of these? And Carol, you as well, if you want to jump in, which of these did you notice most?
For Lance, he had a regressive kind of behavior.
Okay.
He was typically developing. By 18 months, there was loss of words. Loss of words. By 24 months, the doctor was asking us, where are the 200 words? I'm like, but he was back to just no
So
words.
from
He lost it.
speaking words
Yes.
to no words.
To no words.
Wow.
And that's how he was very. It was very marked.
Right.
With Lauren, because she was in a surveillance study, just because she was a sibling of a child with autism. So she was signed in for that study. And so from 6 months, we already monitored. By 2 years old, we already know there's no joint attention. There is peculiar play. There is a lot of sensory issues. But if you don't, really pinpoint, pay attention. As a parent, you have to be very keen, especially that you have an older child. Me having a child in the spectrum, I was like, I wanted to deny it. Because I don't want another diagnosis.
Right.
And
I
so,
think any parent would feel that
Yes.
in the beginning and say,
Yes.
goodness, we have one. What is
Yes.
going on?
yes,
Right.
there is surveillance, but at the same time, you're hoping that she doesn't have it.
Right.
And my husband was like, do not ignore the elephant in the room, because it's coming out. But I was like, while we see the symptoms, we already started intervention for
Right.
her. But the formal diagnosis was around 43 months, 48 months.
Right.
And that's how we ended up diagnosing her.
And
Yes.
Carol, you recently started an autism support group, which I commend you for. It's absolutely amazing. What prompted you to start the support?
Well, I will share with you. Early on, when your child is diagnosed, and like I mentioned earlier, my son is 14, I can go back and tell you that I still remember to this day Barbara, who is the person that I reached out to, because you get this diagnosis. As she said, you come out with more questions. You really don't have any guidance.
You feel alone.
You feel alone.
You feel alone.
The physician tells me, evidence-based treatment is ABA. It's not covered by insurance, and see you, and you're on your way to kind of figure it out on your own. So through the years, you learn to accept and deal with the diagnosis. And honestly, I'll share that waiting rooms for ABA, for OT, for speech, become a sort of support group. Whether you like it or not, you kind of sit there and you're with other parents that are in a similar situation. You're able to share stories.
You want that connection. You want
the connection.
Hey, you're not alone. I get it.
So you get to the point where you accept and you're going along. And then, I know that you guys have experienced the same thing,
Yes.
where you get tapped on the shoulder and there's a new parent that just received a diagnosis. And can you speak to this person? And, you reach out and you try to help that individual the same way Barbara helped me. And anyway, that's what kind of led to the support group. There was a nurse that worked on one of the units where I work, in the hospital where I work. And I had one of the social workers on my team come and tell me, can you please speak to Roberto? His daughter was just diagnosed. So I found the right opportunity to speak to Roberto, and he was visibly distraught with the new diagnosis. We chatted, I gave him resources, and we went along back to our jobs. And about 9 months later, I saw him again, and he pulled me aside and he said, Carol, I have this great idea. We have to start a support group for the employees. There's so many people, they don't have a place to turn to, they don't have a place to go. we need to do this.
Right.
So we started the support group internally, and from that it grew to our Healthy West Kendall support group that's open to the community.
That is absolutely amazing. How did you hear about the support group?
We heard it from the newsletter from University of Miami Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, because we are registered through card.
Right.
And we got that, and we also have that through the website, right?
We all work for Baptist Health.
Right.
So the support group is co-facilitated by Dr. Michael Alessandri of CARD at the University of Miami. So it is distributed through their newsletter, but it's also on the West Kendall Facebook page. It's on digital media.
Wonderful.
And it's a nice place to come. We welcome anybody.
Absolutely. Jo and Ray, let me ask you, what are some of the challenges, but also the benefits and blessings of having raising children with autism?
Joe will tell you about the challenges. I'll start with the blessings.
Okay.
I like that.
Yes.
Is he the positive ray of light here?
Oh yes,
It seems.
he is.
It's always a balance.
The diagnosis, especially when you have 2 children, will change you completely as a person. I learned to become more patient, listen more, and I had to rein in my overprotectiveness to being collaborative. Because
Wow, that's a very specific. I like that.
Because with the teachers, they don't understand your child, so you tend to overprotect. However, the teacher is going to be your source of support.
Yes.
Your teacher is going to be the one who's going to help your kid. So we expose them with small doses of frustration so that they learn life skills.
Right.
But we have to make sure that they don't get overwhelmed and misunderstood.
Or to let them feel where they learn.
Correct.
But you're still protecting them from afar.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, I like that. Absolutely, letting them flourish as well.
Yes.
And Jo, I know that you can speak on the challenges of that.
Yes, I've heard, like people quitting their jobs or just doing part-time instead of full-time. That happened to us.
Right.
At some point, I have to stop. Like, you become a renegade parent.
Right.
Right?
This is your job.
This is your job. And professional advancement, you let go, to really focus on the kids. Communication is very important because you have to bridge the gap.
Right.
And they're, communication-wise, it's a challenge when they're not talking. So especially in our time when there's no iPad, no technology yet, we have to teach our kids sign language.
Wow.
We had to learn sign language, different forms of communication to fill in the gap. Okay, sensory issues. There's so much that you deal with. This impairs nutrition. This impairs their learning and their behavior. So you also have to deal with that physically and emotionally draining.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt you,
Yes.
but we have to put a break, and I want to pick up when we get back. You're watching the Health Channel, all health, all the time on South Florida PBS. If you have a question, please call in using the toll-free number, 855-796-44. So how would you describe the journey for 3 of you as a diagnosis just to where you are today with your children? Carol, I'm going to begin with you.
So, we start off and your priorities change as your child gets older. So initially, the priority is getting them to communicate because as Dr. Agrawal had mentioned earlier, a lot of the behaviors that our children exhibit are difficulty with communicating what they want and don't want. So I think that is a priority and it remains a priority. But as the child gets older, you start to think about where's my child going to be in the future? My son is 14 now, so I'm now thinking about the transition IEP and vocational rehab. Where is he going to be? What are his skills that he'll be able to use in a work environment?
Right.
And so, you get comfortable, and then, then now we're going through puberty, and that brings a whole other set of concerns with it. And in the support group that I hold, one of the things that I'm hearing often from parents is, when the child ages out of the school system, what's going to happen? Because our children people aren't knocking down our doors to employ our children. We still have work to do there. So that's something that I think about. Not just that. As a parent, what if I was to be asked what keeps me up at night, would be what's going to happen when I'm gone. So I tell my coworkers, I'm on the Live Forever plan. Obviously I'm not going to live forever, but it's something that, you know, as your child gets older, when they're small, you don't even want to think about that. You're just getting through the day. But as time goes on, you have to face that reality. And I think that's something that we need to bring to light. As Dr. Agrawal had said, if we don't put something in place, if we don't do something for our future, what's going to happen to all of these children when we're gone?
And it's your natural instinct to worry as a parent, and even so, you want to make sure that child while they may not have those protective barriers, once you're gone, you still want to make sure that they can excel and be accepted.
Exactly. I think that's what we all want as a parent.
And Jo, I know before the break you were talking about some of those challenges, and I just like Carol, you were mentioning that communication, teaching your child sign language. So with all those challenges that you describe, have they changed since the diagnosis?
My husband would call it night and day.
Tell me why.
Because, you know, if I look back and looking at them now, I would not expect them to be at this level right now.
I mean, you shared and Ray shared during the break that Lauren is on the honor roll of her school, which is absolutely amazing, and both children are excelling so well.
Yes, but it's a lot of pushing and knowing when to step back.
Right, which is very difficult.
And do not be scared for your kids. You are your kids' experts.
Yes.
And you are there as the main cheering squad. So the hardest part, like Carol said, is looking at the future, because you have to be present and you have to be there.
Right.
You cannot be looking at, you know, ahead but tackle on what's in front of you.
Right.
Now Lance is a junior. He's 16. He's a drumline member. He is a hip hop dancer. He's a digital artist. He serves in our church as an altar server. And there are things that he thought he could never do. But I always tell my kids, don't say no. Give me a month and then come back to me. If you hate it, I'll take you out.
Okay. I think that's all across the board. That's a really good mentality to have.
Yes. But for them to have this social anxiety, you know, it takes a little bit of, you know, pushing.
And as you said, it's probably a fine line, because you want to push, but you have to know when it's too much.
Step back. Yes.
Absolutely.
Very crucial.
Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. You know, with my child, I do a lot of career counseling, because now he's going to go to college. So I have to discover his strengths. So he loves computers, but he wants to pursue art, but I have to counsel him a lot that when you do art, is it really going to have a stable job for you? Right. So I told him,
you don't want to be a dream crusher, but you want to be a realist.
Exactly. So I told him you could have a day job and you could have a night job. So if your day job, so I'm steering him to, he's very interested with computer forensics, cybersecurity, or IT. And maybe, you know, he could pursue his dream to be a digital artist during the night. And I told him, if your career in art takes off, you could quit your day job.
Right.
But at least you could pay your rent.
Yes. We need a roof over your head first.
Exactly. So since they're dreamers and they don't have, they're very naive, so you have to bring them down to be practical and realistic.
Yes.
And I think it's safe to say, I think for all three of you, that without the help of these support groups, to have these resources, do you feel that things would have been different?
I totally believe that, because it's so overwhelming and it's just like a monster that you have to tackle.
Right.
So along the way, you need people that know what you're going through and you're able to express, especially men. We don't express ourselves.
Right.
We just battle it in and we're fixers. But we cannot fix autism. There's no cure. So you're going to have to get through the process and know how to tame your monster.
Right. Yes.
Okay? Once you know how to do that, your life will become better.
Right.
And your children will respond better. Because we get so hung up with the deficits and we tend to forget what are their talents and their strengths.
Yes.
So for our children, once they started talking and they have better social skills and they're communicating, we hone in on developing their strengths
and you
and
focus
their
on the
talents.
positives.
Correct. And that end up giving them a lot of self-confidence. And they're not afraid to venture out. They're not afraid to face the world.
I mean, I can't imagine that change of mentality is not easy to do, but once you do it, it shows you things in a very different perspective.
Correct.
And you opened up for something that I really wanted to talk about, were these misconceptions that there is about autism, and one of them being that if you're autism, that means you're intellectually disabled, and that's not true. Correct?
That is not
true for
true for our children. They were diagnosed with intellectual and cognitive delays when they were small. But Lauren, at age 10, kindergarten, she took a test in school, and we discovered she was gifted. So she ended up in a gifted program, and she was intellectually superior.
And
her
you were
IQ,
shocked at that point as well.
we could not even believe it, you know. And then Lance, who had a very hard time with sequencing and following commands and complex instructions, became a hip hop dancer, and he taught himself how to do audio mixing.
It's incredible. I need to have Lance teach me some hip hop moves, because that's my jam right there.
Yes, he's an incredible dancer.
Amazing. Carol, another myth is people with autism don't want to be friends.
Absolutely not true. I think they may not have the skills to know how to acquire a friendship. It doesn't mean that they don't want to. And sometimes the behaviors, my son has some vocal stereotypy, he stims, so he scripts a lot. It doesn't mean that he doesn't want to be friends. He actually attends a group on Sundays that's about to end, where they pair teenagers and young adults with typical peers.
Right.
And they do things together. They go on field trips. They do art. They do all sorts of things, and it's a bonding.
Right.
So they do want to have friends. They just may not know how to go about doing it.
I'm so glad you explained that. Any last minute tips as we wrap up, or any viewers out there who might be thinking about, goodness, where can I go? Where can I find one of these support groups? What would you say to them?
Seek support. Be your child's biggest advocate. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And we welcome anyone to attend the support group. I've learned so much from Ray and Jo. We learn from each other. It's a safe space.
Yes.
We all speak the same language. In Jo's words, we're from the same tribe. I was just having this conversation with the doctor before she left. She
It's your
said,
squad.
It's our squad.
It's your squad.
So please, we're on the West Kendall Facebook page.
Okay.
It's once a month, usually on Wednesdays, the second Wednesday of the month. So we invite anybody in the audience to come, share your story, get support.
Absolutely.
Obtain resources.
Thank you so much for to all of you for being here, for sharing your story, hopefully empowering our viewers as well. That's all the time that we have. Be sure to join us next time on the Health Channel. All Health, all the time on South Florida PBS, and follow us on social media at All Health TV. And please be sure to visit our website, allhealthtv.com, where you can watch a live stream of the Health Channel and watch videos from previous episodes. I'm Katty Buccio. We'll see you next time.